So all of this is stop motion, and I had to make a little clay Steve the fish. It animates really nice and poses really well. Now for the design of the character, it is based on Steve the fish. I would include the music in this video, but I want to avoid being hit with a copyright strike from YouTube. So I've got the character wrapped in cling film. This is just keeping the character clean for now, because clay has a really bad tendency of just attracting dirt no matter what. If I unwrap this cling film, I can show you more of this character. As I said before, this character has a clay skin. To be more precise, it is a plasticine skin, which is an oil-based clay. And this is ideal for claymation because you can move the character's arm and it's really nice and flexible. It doesn't dry out and become hard, it just stays soft forever. You might have to do a bit of repair work, kind of patch up any rips, but ultimately it's nice and soft and very flexible. There is a armature underneath this clay, so it isn't just clay right now. This is the armature that I used before I obviously put clay on it. It's made from aluminium wire, which is a really nice soft postable metal, and the body is padded out with tinfoil to keep it both light and not to waste loads of clay. And then as well, what I've done is wrapped all the wire and the foil in a thread, which I've glued in place. This just makes it where the clay can actually bond really nicely onto the wire, and the clay I'm using is called Hue Clay. They're the new operators of New Plus Plasticine and renamed it to Hue Clay. And that's the plasticine used on stuff like Wallace & Gromit or other claymation projects in the UK. Part 1, armature making. So I'm kind of going chronological order of how I made this little character, so I'm going to be going over how I made the armature. The wire I'm using is aluminium wire and it's 1.5 in diameter. Great for animating, and armature wire poses really nicely and you can kind of just bend it with your hands with ease. So I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to bend it slightly at the bottom, and this is going to be our little foot for the character. Then I'm going to go further up the wire and I'm going to bend a nice little circle. This is going to be the main body of Steve. Following this, what I'm going to do is make an arm, and I do this by pulling the wire out to the side of the body, then twisting these wires together just to make the arm sturdy enough to be animated. So I'm just twisting, 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 twisting. You want to make sure that you don't over twist this wire because you will end up damaging the wire, and then we're just twisting all the wire to make this second arm. Quite often you might make all these arms and legs and body separately, but because I don't have anything to secure these all together with, like milliput for example, what I'm doing is just doing this all in one giant strand. So it is a little bit more awkward to do, but it will be nice and strong. So to make the tail fin at the back, what I'm doing is forcing the wire through the back of the body, and I want to make quite a nice round triangle shape, and then what I'm doing is twisting this back fin, and this is just kind of securing that shape in position. Then I'm pulling the wire back down through the body again, then looping the wire back up to the body again, much like we did with the arms, then twisting the wire all together again, and taking it down to the first leg that we made. Afterwards, twisting this all together, just to kind of secure everything in place, and closing off the loop of the entire body because we used one giant strand of wire. So here's the armature after I finished twisting all the wire together. It looks a little bit rough right now, but that's because we don't have any of the padding on. To bulk up the character, what I'm going to do is use foil, and I'm going to apply hot glue through the center of the body. Then I'm wrapping the foil around the wire that I've put hot glue on. Obviously avoid touching the hot glue because it will burn your hands. You've got to do this quite quickly because the hot glue will set and kind of cool down and not be sticky anymore. This isn't enough to bulk up the character enough to the degree that I want, because I want a nice fat round body. So what I'm going to do is add more hot glue and then add more foil and really kind of like press this down a little bit because I want a nice solid base. So I've skipped ahead in time a little bit. I've made the character the shape that I want, but I'm just checking over the character. This piece right here was loose, so what I'm going to do is peel it up and then apply some hot glue to secure it down. So what I'm doing is just gathering up a load of thread. This is the same thread that you'd use with a sewing needle. Then I'm going to be gluing this down with a bit of fabric glue. It's just nice light glue. It's nice and flexible. What I'm doing is scooping it up with a cocktail stick and then applying it to the wire, spreading the glue across the surface, making sure to get both sides. Using my other hand to hold the end in place, what I'm going to do is start wrapping this around with the thread, making sure to get this nice and tightly wrapped around. I keep almost gluing myself with the glue that's right there, so I'm just going to move it to the side.
I glued my head to my shoulder.
And then I'm going to keep wrapping this around. I'm going to go really slow around the hand because this is probably the most difficult bit to wrap around. Then after wrapping the hand successfully, what I'm doing is wrapping all the excess back towards the shoulder. Now that I've finished this arm, what I'm going to do is move on to the next one. This process is identical for the arms and legs. After making all the arms and legs, you want to leave this for a few hours and let it dry. Then what I'm doing is going in with a pair of scissors and trimming off any loose threads. For the back tail, it is very different. What I'm going to do is wrap the tail in some masking tape. I want to cover the wire in tape so it'll make wrapping the tail a lot easier. Cutting around the tail to make it more tail shaped again. Then again using a cocktail stick to spread the fabric glue around the tail fin. Then I'm just wrapping the tail in thread. Add a lot of texture for this clay to actually bond onto, so when it's getting animated our clay doesn't slip off and it's just really nicely embedded into all this texture. Then I'm going to move on to the main body of Steve. So I'm just wrapping this around, making sure I get a nice coverage of thread all across the surface. Then this is what the armature looks like when it's all been prepped for the clay to go on. The arms and legs pose really nicely and bend really well, considering that we've covered this in glue and thread. So because the character is such an awkward shape, it can't actually stand up by itself. So what we're going to have to do is do a little bit of rigging. To do this, I'm going to use one of my rigging attachments that has a double spike on it. And because the foil is quite soft, this can be just stabbed straight into all this tin foil. It holds the entire weight, and you can see this being used in these little clips. Part 2, sculpting the clay. So for the clay, as I said before, I'm using Hue Clay, which is the new supplier of Nuplast plasticine, which used to be used on Wallace & Gromit and other claymation projects in the UK. So Hue Clay gave me 3 little packs of some free samples. When you buy it online, you do get a bar of it that is about 500 grams, so it is quite a good bit of clay. Before I get any further, I'm going to clean my hands. This is because clay is horrific for capturing dirt and getting really mucky. So I'm also going to clean my table and clean all my tools. So because I don't have an orange, and unfortunately Steve is a orange colour because he's an orange fish, what I'm going to have to do is mix the yellow and the red together. So I'm mixing this by hand right now because I don't have any of my typical tools with me. So I'm going to have to mix quite a lot of clay together to get the amount of orange that I actually want, and will probably make my hand sore at the end of this. What I typically would do is basically use a pasta roller machine to kind of roll out all the clay. It's a lot less strain on your hands, and personally I find it quite a bit quicker. Just feed the clay through and twist the handle, and it just kind of flattens out all the clay. Finally, after mixing up all the orange, what I'm going to do is take a small amount, I'm going to flatten it out, so I'm just pressing all this clay onto the leg, really trying to push it deep into the texture that we made before with all the thread, but with this threading it's got enough to cling onto, followed by continuing to sculpt into the leg more. I'm then going to repeat this process for the other leg, and then doing the same thing again for the arms. So for the back tail fin, again I'm flattening out clay, and I'm going to push it into the surface, and really try and get it to embed itself into the threaded texture that we've made. To help smooth the surface, what I'm going to do is use a wet wipe across the surface to help smudge and smooth the surface. And again, you can use your hands to do this as well, just make sure your hands are nice and warm. And as well, you can add some talcum powder to your hands as well, and that will really help smooth out the surface. After that, once I'm happy with the texture of the clay, I'm going to move on to making the eyes. After I've cleaned my hands again to get any orange plasticine off, what I'm going to do is start mixing the white in my hands. Then what I'm going to do is tear off a piece of clay because I've got a little bit too much clay to make the eye. Then using a picture of Steve as a reference, I'm going to try and sculpt out a general shape for the eye. Once I'm happy with this shape, I'm going to add it onto the face, and then I'm just working it into the head more, just kind of expanding the eye and really working it in, trying to get it to the correct size. I'm then repeating the same steps for the second eye. To connect the eye better onto the face, what I'm going to do is use my silicone sculpting tool to smudge and blend the eye onto the surface of the face, really blending these two bits of clay together. So I'm using this little former disc in my extruder tool, and that will really shape the clay down into this little circle shape, and then screw on the cap. Then when I turn this handle, it forces all the clay through the little hole and shapes it all to be the same diameter thickness of this circle. After cutting out the piece that I want, I'm just pressing this onto the face. When applying this, be really careful because the clay is really heavily pigmented, especially the black, and it will heavily mark up the orange and the white when it touches it. So to clean the surface, I'm having to use this scraper tool, and this is just scraping the surface. Ordinarily, you could use a wet wipe or maybe some lighter fluid. I'm just using a scraper tool, so I can just scrape that off, and then I'll just smooth out the surface afterwards. So this is Steve after I finished sculpting him. He's looking pretty good right now and he's pretty much ready to be animated. If I bend his arm, he's really nice and poseable. Then for the eyes, which I fixed off screen because the pupils were too small, the pupils of the eyes can be lifted off and then repositioned onto the eye itself, and that just kind of makes him look like he's looking off in a different direction, so I can move it to the side, or I can make him look downwards. To keep the character clean before I animate, what I'm going to do is wrap the character in cling film, and this will just prevent any dust from getting lodged in the clay or dirty before I get around to animating in the next few days. Part 3. Prepping to animate. So I've already done some preparations for my workspace to be animated on, and the main set piece, like the cutting mat, is secured down using masking tape. The plants are secured down with a mixture of hot glue and blue tack, so nothing moves whilst I'm midway through animating. Ordinarily, I'd animate on a better, more sturdier animation table, and typically I'd animate using my Canon DSLR camera. I'm working away from home, so I'm having to animate using my phone and this little phone stand. I'm also animating with Dragonframe, using the Dragonframe Tether app to connect my phone to my laptop so I can animate on my laptop whilst using my phone as a camera. Dragonframe is a professional stop-motion software, but because it might not be accessible for everyone, here's some free alternatives. Like Stopmotion Studio, which is a free app with upgradable features which you can animate using for free. In the full version of this video, I do go into more detail on how I made this character, covering more on how I made the armature and how I applied the clay to the character, and kind of talking about more about my techniques. And as well, in that video, I go into detail on how I animated that character and some of my thought processes that went into animating the character. That video can be found on my Patreon. On my Patreon, you can find a free 3D printed armature that is pretty good for claymation. And as well, if you upgrade to the learning tier, there is a tutorial on how to do rig removal for free using DaVinci Resolve. As well, I've got a learning resource for doing lip sync dialogue. These are just the mouth files for doing this lip sync here. I hope you found this condensed version educational. If you want any more videos on the subject of stop motion or anything else, just comment below and consider giving this video a like and subscribe, and have a great day!